Hello. Welcome to an artist talk as part of the Katherine Hyde Visiting Artist Program. This lecture is a part of our Canada Theme Semester programming, which is featuring the extraordinary photographer Paul Zizka. It is sponsored by the Department of Art and Design and the Institute of International Studies. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our theme semester selection process in the art gallery. I'm the director of the MSSU Spiva Art Gallery, and each year, once the theme semester is announced for the coming year, I go on a search for artists who are really creating work that is exemplary in terms of how it represents social, cultural, political, artistic, or environmental issues within the country that we are featuring as part of our theme semester here at MSSU. And I probably search for well over, months, I should say. I search for months and I look at many, many artists, and the artists that I end up selecting, I feel, are really creating wonderful works that represent, again, some of those cultural, social, political, or environmental facets of the country that is being highlighted. And so, therefore, I really feel that Paul Zizka is one of these artists who is creating exemplary work. He is an award-winning mountain landscape and adventure photographer based in Banff, Canada. A prolific adventurer, Paul's journey to capture the underdocumented has taken him to all 7 continents, as well as to each of Canada's provinces and territories. So I'm going to allow Tijourn Skelton, who is one of our gallery assistants, to continue with the introduction of Paul and his work.
Good afternoon. As continuing, Paul photography has been featured in a variety of highly regarded publications, including National Geographic, Outside Magazine, Globe and Mail, Wall Street Journal, and many more. He is frequently published in some of North America's top magazines and has 4 coffee table photography books: Spirit in the Sky, Northern Lights Photography, Aloft Canada, Rockies Aerial Photography, the Canadian Rockies, Rediscovered, and Summit and Starlight, the Canadian Rockies. In his latest project, Cryophilia, Paul is bringing awareness to vanishing ice by capturing changing landscapes and ice features around the world. Paul enjoys life in the mountains with his wife, Megan J. Ward, and their 2 daughters. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Zizka lecture on his work, which is now in the gallery through October 2nd.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. It means a lot. Thanks for selecting me among all those other talented artists that we have here on this side of the border. It's such an honor to be here. Thanks to everyone who made this event happen. I was astonished when I looked through the brochure here. I was astonished to see how much you have going on as part of this semester. And I can only imagine the amount of work that went into all those events. So thank you so much for everything that went on behind the scenes. I love this idea of the semester. I think it's brilliant. And I'm delighted to be spending the next hour representing my country through photography here. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. And then we're going to enjoy some images of Canada. Here we go. And I'll tell you more about this place shortly here. But I want to start by, saying how thankful I am for being given this opportunity to share my passion, share my photography, and share my home with you all this evening. I'm really honored to be collaborating with the wonderful crew that you have at MSSU, and to finally, after months of preparation, to finally be here connecting with you all through the power of technology. It's truly wonderful. And I think this international semester is such a great idea. I was amazed at how long it's been going on for. So good for you for just bringing this back every year and celebrating different parts of the world. I think it's a really important thing to do. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to highlighting. What I'm hoping to do is highlight not just the beauty and the aesthetics of the Canadian landscape, but also the diversity of landscapes that we have here. And of course, I only have a finite amount of time, but I'm going to try to cover as much ground as I can geographically. But also, I find those evenings are good opportunities to slow things down and tell some of the stories that go along with some of those images. And so I want to do some of that as well this evening. So what I've done is I've selected a few of the images out of the exhibit, a few of the images that are being printed and put on display. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story behind them, a little bit about the area in which they were taken. So I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, perhaps before we move on to the photographs. I was born and raised in this place. This is Quebec City. It's a beautiful city on the eastern side of the country in the French-speaking part of Canada. So French is my first language, hence the accent that you hear. But fairly early in life, I developed a desire to go see what existed beyond the borders of my home, Quebec. And then I came across the mountains. I came across the Canadian Rockies, and I was immediately in awe. I was immediately taken by the place. That was well before I got into photography. But the mountains here in the western part of the country had a huge impact on me. And since then, that's where I've been living, in the mountains. This is where I live. This is the town of Banff. You can see the Bow River sort of streaming through the shot there. And it's a town of about 7,000 people, swells to about 30,000 on busy summer nights when all the hotels are full. It's in the heart of one of the world's oldest national parks, and it's by far the most visited national park in Canada. It's essentially Banff is in the heart of the national park of the same name, Banff National Park, and I would say it's the flagship national park of the Canadian park system. And I've been living in this town for about 15 years now, and I live here, as was mentioned, with my wife, Megan. My wife's an author, and we have two little girls with us here as well. They're age 6 and 11. And I think they're just starting to grasp how fortunate they are to wake up in this setting every day and to wake up in a place that, frankly, people save up for months, years to be able to spend a few days out of their lives in Banff National Park, checking out the mountains. And it's really rewarding to just see them grasp how fortunate they are to just wake up in the morning and look up at this mountain, Cascade Mountain, day after day. And we tell them, there's a reason why when you go on Banff Avenue on the main street, you'll hear 10 languages in 10 minutes. This is a place that people dream to see once in their lives. And so it's always good reminders to not take those special places for granted. So such a gift to be able to operate out of Banff National Park. And I've been doing photography full-time for about 15 years now, which feels a bit surreal to me. I still pitching myself at times. I moved to the mountains with the intention to just explore a little bit further. Every new visit, I would check out a new area of the mountains. And then I find that what happens here in the Rockies is you're surrounded by so much beauty that it will awaken the artist in pretty much anyone. So you'll see people stick around and then pick up a paintbrush or pick up a guitar or pick up a camera. And I find it's a place that really stirs up artistry in a lot of different people. So Banff is home to a lot of people who make a living out of their art. And being based out of Banff National Park means that inspiration is always close at hand. The mountains are a very dynamic type of environment, and they're also very vast. And so the canvas that you have to work with as a photographer is really limitless. It's ever changing. You can go back to even those iconic locations, such as this one. This is Tujac Lake, close to home. And it's sure to present itself in a new light, in a new angle, in a way that you've never seen it before. So the mountains have a way to refresh themselves and keep things really, really interesting creatively for the local artists. And for what I like to do, which is landscape and adventure and night photography, I really couldn't think of a better base of operations than the town of Banff. So through my work, I do spend a lot of time abroad. I'm very fortunate that I get to document remote and wild corners of the world through what I do. And I also teach photography a lot. So I get the privilege to introduce fellow photographers to those magical places. Places like you have Greenland in the top left there, Mongolia top right, Antarctica in the bottom left, and Easter Island in the bottom right. But the more I leave the country, the more I realize that Canada's pretty special and pretty unique. And the more I travel, the less I take what we have here for granted. And so this evening, I'd like to celebrate the beauty of this place by not only presenting you with some of the photographs, but also, like I said, really just get into the stories. I find the way that we consume photography these days is through rapid fire scrolling, right, on small devices. And it's nice when you have those opportunities to share stories, when you have time to do that, to actually jump on those opportunities. So that's what I intend to do tonight. So we'll kick things off with this first image presented in the exhibit, and this is an image called Frozen Kingdom, and it's a photograph that I took on a beautiful morning up high on Mount Robson, which is the highest peak in the Canadian Rockies. It's just under 4,000 meters, so it would be lower than many of the Colorado peaks, for example. But as you can tell, it's very rugged terrain. So from summit to base, it's a mountain that's got over 3,000 meters of relief. So it's very, very rugged. It's a heavily glaciated environment, as you can tell. This is really the realm of ice. Even to this day, even though we've lost a lot of ice, and it's a type of environment that's vanishing very, very quickly, it's a world that still dominates. It's a feature that still dominates a lot of this area here where I live. And it's a world that is so foreign to so many people that that's where I think a lot of the joy comes in from for me in photography, is just the ability to, through a collection of pixels, essentially, to bring those special places, those foreign worlds, to people who don't know anything about them. Especially through, social media, we have this ability to reach people who will never ever get close to a glacier, or will never really even get to experience the sensation of cold, right? And so it's such a joy for me as a photographer to be able to do that. So this is Mount Robson in Mount Robson Provincial Park, over just across the border in British Columbia. We'll follow this up with a little tour of northernmost Canada. The northernmost part of the country is made up of 3 territories, and those are really remote places. They're very hard to access. They're places that very few people get to see, even Canadians, right? Only a very, very small percentage of Canadians have ever been, say, to the Yukon, which is arguably the most easily accessible of those 3 territories. And even less have made it to Northwest Territories, let alone Nunavut, where no roads exist and where the density of population is the lowest in all of the country. So we'll do a little tour of northernmost Canada, and then we'll bring things closer to home here in Banff National Park. This is a quintessentially Canadian image, I would argue, that was taken in the Northwest Territories about a couple years ago. Absolutely mesmerizing night in the north. I would argue the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis, is probably for me the finest, most exciting natural phenomenon that one can ever hope to witness or photograph. It's so, so special to see the aurora. And this was taken on a night where I was actually teaching. I was up there in a workshop setting, and to be able to experience a scene like this alongside 12 fellow photographers, many of whom had never seen the aurora before. Some of them were from the southern states. They'd never been anywhere really cold or anywhere close to where the aurora could occur, etc. Is so, so special. Just to see the emotion it stirs up in people, and to hear the oohs and ahs, and to see people get to work with their cameras and go home with images they're proud of. That is such a rewarding part of what I do. So this was on West Prelude Lake, And when we do our event up there, we usually get an indigenous local lady who's just a wonderful, very resourceful woman to build an igloo that provides us with a really cool foregrounds for those nighttime shots. And so people were able to work with the two sort of typically northerly elements of the igloo and the northern lights to create pretty magical images such as this one. And this was taken at about -40°C, which is the same in Fahrenheit, I guess. So very cold night up north. You need to bundle up, and you need to, of course, with the aurora, you need to pay the price and put in the time, right? The aurora is a very fickle phenomenon, so you have to be sort of in it to win it. And so getting people to commit to being out there in those types of temperatures is often the biggest hurdle of those events, even more so than just taking the photos themselves, trying to keep people enthusiastic. But we had a great group that night, fortunately. Here's another shot, another aurora shot from the Northwest Territories, taken in much warmer conditions. That was taken in September. And this is a self-portrait taken at Alexandra Falls. Alexandra Falls is a place that, you know, if it was located anywhere further south, it would be as popular as Niagara Falls or some other massive, you know, iconic location. But because it takes a bit of work to get to, it's pretty far north, it's a place that amazingly you can still have to yourself, especially at night. And that night we experienced just an absolutely mesmerizing aurora display with green bands just dancing overhead for hours on end. And this was actually a full moon night, believe it or not. So this shows you how powerful the aurora displays can be at those high latitudes, where even the full moon is no match for what's happening beyond that. And so amazing, just green curtains just streaming across the sky that night. The roar of the falls, really, really magical, especially when the moon rose and we realized the aurora was going to stick around. That was probably sort of the high point of the evening. So incredible place. Some of you hopefully have been, but if you've never been to the Northwest Territories and you're looking for solitude and to get away from it all, just fantastic place. And arguably the best place, certainly one of the best places in the world for Northern Lights viewing or photography, Northwest Territories. We're going to go over next door to the Yukon now, the Yukon which borders with Alaska. And that is a place that is very different in character from the Northwest Territories. It's a lot more rugged. It's a lot more mountainous. It's heavily glaciated still, especially this area that you see here. This is Kluane National Park. Lots of glacial rivers just loaded with silt. And therefore you have the turquoise lakes that are associated with that. You have massive ice fields. This is where you'll find Mount Logan, highest point in Canada. And yeah, this is pretty typical scene of Kluane National Park. And you have valleys like this where barely anyone ever ventures into. This was shot from a plane. This is an aerial view of the Donjek River Valley. So if you were to follow this valley upstream, eventually you would just come across some of the biggest ice fields in North America. Absolutely mesmerizing area. Now we're going to go over to perhaps the lesser known and most remote part of Canada. This shot was arguably taken one of the most remote reaches of the entire country. And this is in Nunavut. This is a territory that sort of broke off from the Northwest Territories in 2000, I believe. And it's the third of the three territories. And it's extremely rugged in places, as you can tell. Then it's pretty much as rugged as it gets, given that the west face of Mount Thor that you're looking at here on the right side of the photograph is famous for being the tallest purely vertical drop in the world. Is actually overhanging from the summit to the ground there. So this is the highest sort of purely vertical rock face in the world that you see there, the west face of Mount Thor. So the glaciers have done a lot of incredible work in that area, and it's a place that just kind of defies description, and even the photos struggle to do it justice for sure. It's a place that you sort of have to see it to believe it, but it does look so more or less like this, where you have those really jagged teeth of rock just shooting up, straight up skyward, and massive glaciers. And this was taken on a week-long ski traverse with my wife in the spring many years ago. And it's a place that had such an impact on us that we refer to it regularly as our conversation drift back to past travels, etc. It's truly a place of magic. Mostly visited in the summer. Not too many people, even in the summer, go up that way. But I believe we were the only two people in the whole national park, in all of Ayuituk National Park, those days that we were there. And I'll show you another image from there. That's actually looking at the same rock face, just from the south instead of the north. So this is the west face of Mount Dore. And this is the Weasel River. It's very cold at that time of year, so you have to melt snow to find. You won't find running water anywhere, but sometimes you'll find those turquoise blobs of ice popping up that make for really interesting foregrounds. A very rugged place, a place that can be very harsh, very windy, but it's a place that you never forget. Truly magnetic, Nunavut. All right, we're gonna head south now, believe it or not. This shot was taken about 1,000 miles south of the previous one. Yet it's an image that I think you would agree still has a very much a northerly feel, right? With the polar bears, the tundra. So this is in the subarctic. And the fact that this shot was taken 1,000 miles directly south of the previous one really gives you a sense of how vast the Canadian North is, right? It's absolutely immense, and in a way is devoid of a lot of everything. There's not a lot that exists up there, not a lot of life forms. It's very harsh landscape. But some animals like the beautiful polar bears make a go of it. And last fall, I had the opportunity to go to this location. This is in northern Manitoba. And the hopes were to photograph polar bears and northern lights. And we were extremely lucky in terms of the bear sightings. I was there for 4 days, and I don't think we ever went more than 30 minutes straight without being in the presence of one of those beautiful animals. We had eyes on bears almost nonstop, and I would argue probably the best place in the world that I know of for polar bear sightings. And I found that the place is also managed really well, where the bears are allowed to live good lives. They're not the impact on the animals from visitors is minimal. I thought that was all very well handled. So if you're ever looking for a place to see bears in their habitat, just being bears, then Churchill, northern Manitoba, is a great place to go. And one night, I believe that was the second to last night, we got to experience probably one of the most memorable scenes that I've had the chance to witness in my entire career as a photographer. We had a bear wander below the aurora, pretty active aurora, for probably about an hour, and I took so many images just while I stood there in complete disbelief that those two elements were overlapping in front of me, those two icons of the north. I took so many frames, and the bears just don't stay still. They're there for a reason, so that bear's walking around and smelling things and just scratching away at things, and occasionally it would almost pause for a second or two, and then I would try to get an image that was worthwhile. And eventually I came away from the experience with a couple images that I really treasure, because those are, they're not easy images to get. Bears don't take directions very well, and so as you can imagine, it was my batting average was not very good that night. But I got a couple images, including this one, that I really treasure and cherish, and that take me right back to that amazing moment in subarctic Canada. So special. Okay, we're still in the north here, about the same latitude as the previous shot, only this is taken midsummer. This is a place that very few people know that it exists, even here in Canada. And this is one of Canada's newest national parks, is the Torngat Mountains National Park. And this is located in the far north of Quebec and Labrador. And Quebec and Labrador are not places that are typically associated with rugged landscapes. Usually, you know, the geology is very old in Quebec and Labrador, and you're looking at, you know, you'll hardly ever find a bump in the landscape that doesn't have trees all the way to the top of it. But up there are still very rugged scenes, such as this one. This is a place that also has the last remnant glaciers in Labrador and Quebec. They probably have 10 years left to them, to their existence. And it's a place that where you have one of the most dense, healthiest polar bear populations, one of the southernmost bear populations also in the world. And you not only brown bears, but also polar bears. So polar bears, before I went to the Torngats, I usually associated with snowy and icy and rocky backgrounds, like the shot that I already showed you. But in this place, in the Torngat Mountains, you can find bears against beautiful green, brown, blue landscapes, which kind of throws your brain for a loop a little bit. It's hard to process. So those are actually black bear tracks on the beach, on a beautiful lake in Torngat Mountains National Park. And this is a place that is very, very hard to access. It's quite the commute getting there, but it's a place that definitely stays with you forever. There's not many places in the world I can think of that combine bears and a fjord-like landscape, a little bit like Norway, you know, big U-shaped valleys. Some of the most incredible icebergs. You get aurora on top of all that. You've got beautiful, amazing history as well. There's so much going for this place, but I think it'll remain pretty quiet for some time because it's tricky to get to. So that's the Torngat Mountains National Park in northern Quebec and Labrador. Okay. So now I want to just get a little bit closer to home, and I want to showcase a few images that were taken right here in the Canadian Rockies. And this is where I do most of my photography, of course. This is beautiful Mount Rundle on a moody day in early summer. I love those June days where you'll have potentially 3-4 thunderstorms just sort of barrel through the mountains on a single day, and every 10 minutes you look outside and the weather has just changed completely. I would argue, if you're a photographer, a landscape photographer, it's one of the most exciting times of year to be in the Canadian Rockies because it changes nonstop. It's so dynamic. It's thunderstorm season. You still have snow on the peaks. You have, the colors are so vibrant. The vast majority of the lakes have opened up. We have lakes here that don't thaw until mid-July. So because of the high elevation and because they're on shaded aspects of the mountains. But yeah, I love June. It's got so much going for it for the landscape photographer. You're just kind of swiveling and shooting all directions at times. And this is a time of year where sometimes you wish you had 3 cameras going at the same time. So this was a very specific, very special, fleeting moment that I experienced at Vermilion Lakes in the late afternoon. And this is the most photographed mountain in Canada, Mount Rundle. It sort of forms part of the iconic skyline of Banff. And I'm sure some of you have been, or you've seen it in multiple images. It's got the classic writing desk shape in terms of the geology, with the very, very mellow western slopes and very steep, cliffy eastern slopes. And it's a mountain that's it's visible from the town side. It's right next to the Trans-Canada Highway. So there's a lot of reasons, and it's very beautiful, aesthetic. And so all those reasons make it so that it's the most photographed mountain in the entire country. And next door to Banff, I want to say a few words about Jasper National Park, because Jasper National Park is just as stunning. But sadly, as many of you probably know, Jasper was the site of massive forest fires one of which reached the town site and damaged it really, really badly. So about a third of the buildings in the town site were burned to the ground, sadly. And that happened right in the middle of tourism season. So it's been really, really sad to see what's happened next door in Jasper. And it's given us a lot of food for thought in Banff here, where, a fire is just as likely. You can see the type of landscape that is prevalent in those areas, right? You have a lot of spruce trees, firs, and you can see how some of them on the left, you can see they're dead because of the pine beetle infestations that we've had. So you can see that, they're really, really dry, really ready to burn. And what happened to a few decades ago is that a lot of those landscapes were sort of prevented from burning because humans felt like fires were a bad thing. And so there was a lot of fire prevention happening a few decades ago, where the second that a fire would start, it would be quickly terminated. And then what happens is you end up, 50 years later with all those forests being overdue to burn at the same time. And then you need to do a lot of prescribed burns. Parks Canada does a lot of prescribed burning, but it's still not enough to stay on top of things. And sadly, yeah, there was a fire that started off maybe 15 kilometers, about 10 miles from Jasper, and reached the town site very, very quickly due to conditions. And there was a lot of damage. A lot of people lost their homes, lost their businesses. So very sad, but the fact remains that Jasper is a true jewel of the Canadian park system. And this is an aerial view of one of Jasper's most iconic locations. This is Maclean Lake. It's the biggest lake in Jasper National Park. This beautiful turquoise gem. It's turquoise because of the silt that's constantly supplied to it by the glaciers that you can see at the far end there. And that silt just remains in suspension and scatters different wavelengths and reflects the blue back to our eyes at the surface. And so you can see it's about, the lake is about, I think, 16, 17 miles long. And it's, you can see just the evidence of the carving that the glaciers have done. Absolutely incredible forces at play to leave behind a landscape as stunning as this. So this is the kind of place that is off limits right now, sadly, but hopefully we'll see Jasper rebound over the next few years. So come to Jasper and encourage the tourism there if you get a chance in the next few years, for sure. So this is another image that is part of the display. Banff is, of course, home to a lot of wildlife. Lots of different kinds of bears, lots of different types of cats, lots of ungulates as well. And yeah, lots and lots of wildlife. And it's one of the main reasons that people come here, and they hope to see, the beautiful landscapes, but also they hope to catch a glimpse of one of those animals. Now, personally, I don't actively go out and seek out wildlife. I do wildlife photography outside of the country, but here at home, you won't find me getting in the car at 5 a.m. and driving up and down the roads trying to find bears, for example. I'm more into landscape and adventure photography. Having said that, there are moments where occasionally animals will photobomb my images. And that's exactly what happened that night. And that is one of the luckiest images I've ever taken. This is a great horned owl perched on top of a lone tree at Lake Minnewanka, not too far from my home, with the northern lights in the background. And this is a scene that, will probably never happen again. You can tell, I hope the owl is quite sharp, meaning it had to look directly at the camera for I think this is a 5 or 7 second exposure. So that owl had to remain just super still for quite a while. And I have 2 or 3 frames where the owl is as still as this. So that owl stayed right there looking directly towards me, towards the camera, for probably 20 seconds or so, which is just remarkable. And so I was quite happy with the image without the owl. I found, the composition is strong. I've got some good motion in the clouds, the aurora in the background. The image has a lot going for it. The light in the foreground is due to the lights by the boat docks that were next to me. So that's not me lighting up the tree or anything like that. That's just light pollution from the boat docks, which actually worked wonders to just bring out detail in that owl. Otherwise, it would have been a silhouette, which would still been an interesting image. But I love that you can see the eyes clearly in that face. And so this is one of my favorite images that I've ever taken. And it's not an image that, I could ever go out there and try to replicate again. And so I think that's another part of photography that I find so rewarding, is that you can freeze those moments that will never occur again. Nothing ever close to this will ever happen again. And that's just keeps things so exciting. It means that what you're contributing to the world, to the photo community, will always be unique, especially in an environment that's as dynamic as the Canadian Rockies, and that always has that element of surprise, that always has a way to blow your mind in a way that you've never experienced before. So this is Lake Minnewanka, Banff National Park, biggest lake in Banff National Park. And as autumn arrives, and amazingly, these are the types of scenes that are just around the corner here for us in Banff. We've already had our first significant snowfall a few days ago. But as fall arrives, many of Banff's lakes turn into some of the world's finest ice rinks. At that time of year, wild ice becomes my main focus, the main focus of my photography. So I try to just clear some time in the schedule, usually late October, early November, to try to chase the best ice possible, because that window of opportunity is often very, very short-lived. And so I try to put myself in a position where I can drop everything and go. Now, some seasons bring better ice than others, for sure, but what we usually hope for is an extended early season cold snap, like 3-4 days in a row where the temperatures will drop to, say, -20 overnight. And during that cold snap, we hope for no wind, so the ice freezes beautifully. And we hope that, of course, precipitation is kept at bay. We hope for no snow, no rain over that period of time. And when that combination of elements materializes, it can really lead to the formation of ice that is just absolutely mesmerizing. So I'll show you a little bit of video content here that illustrates what prime time can look like. Prime time for wild ice can look like right here in the mountains. Just a short video.
Oh, and he's still moving. He's right on top of him.
So just absolutely incredible quality of ice, just that feeling of just the first few strides you take on wild ice in October, November, with turquoise under your skates, fish under your skates, where you can see it's like you're floating. It's really, really strange sensation, and it's incomparable in my mind. And I'll show you another ice skating shot here. That was a dream come true for me. There's few locations in the Rockies that are as iconic as Moraine Lake, and I'm sure some of you have been there, and certainly you've seen it in photographs. It's one of the most incredible skylines I've ever come across. It's one of those scenes where, if as a photographer you could construct it in the most aesthetic way possible, you would probably, if you had the luxury to do that, to place the mountains where you want them, you'd probably end up with something more or less like this. It's incredible what geology and Mother Nature have come up with at Moraine Lake. And this was an absolutely, like I said, a dream come true for me, a night I remember vividly. This is a self-portrait. This is in Banff National Park, taken just as the moon was rising over to the left of the frame, just after the lake froze absolutely perfectly. You can see the reflection of the mountains. You can see the turquoise, the famous Moraine Lake turquoise behind my silhouette there. It really all came together that season. This was taken at the very beginning of October, very end of September. So when I say those scenes are just around the corner, I'm not kidding. This could be 3 weeks away here in Banff National Park. So this was the early season cold snap. when everything aligned, the snow stayed away, and provided this once in a lifetime opportunity. And of course, I took a photo, but I always make a point on those nights to just really really enjoy the moment as well. I think that's one thing we're guilty of just not doing as photographers. We're just all about the photos, and it would have been easy after the photo to just pack it in and try to go get another photo or go to another location. But after this photo ensued, you know, some of the most, probably 30 of the most blissful minutes of my life, where I just paddled, I just skated to the far end of the lake, just marveled at the turquoise underfoot. And if I turned off the headlamp, I could see the stars reflected under my skates, around my skates. Just incredible moment in the mountains. But then there comes a time where when the snow eventually, you know, sooner or later will cover all those lakes. And when the snow does, then those lakes are basically, the skating is essentially done for the season, right? Because those lakes along the divide, they get buried under several feet of snow, and then they look more or less the same until the thawing starts in the springtime. So about a week after I took this, Moraine Lake got covered in snow, and then it essentially looked the same until mid-June when it thawed. So it doesn't really thaw till about early to mid-June. And it's just a white, featureless expanse of white. So it's such a gift when you can just experience just clear ice before the snow comes. But when the snow comes, you still have your go-to places. And where we go, my, you know, sort of fellow wild ice chasers and I, is we seek ice in the local glaciers. So the local glaciers, of course, are not impacted by what's happening outside. You've got those ice caves that will preserve those incredible ice rinks in a way that is really just visually appealing, as you can see here. This is in the Saskatchewan Glacier. This is about I don't want to say a 7-mile hike into the backcountry. So it's a bit of a trek getting there with the skates and the hockey sticks and the camera gear and everything, but it's so worth it once you arrive to find this just perfect ice rink. Essentially one of the last remaining ice rinks in the whole park, because everything else has been buried in snow. It makes for such a gratifying experience and for really, really spectacular photos as well. So when we lose the lakes, then typically that's where you'll find me in you know, starting in about November, December, is I'll start scouting out the ice caves, especially at a time of year where the ice caves are more stable. It's not a place I would venture into in August, for example, but typically those places are more stable in midwinter, and sometimes they offer just perfectly preserved ice rinks. Another type of ice that the Rockies are really, really famous for is waterfall ice. And as winter arrives, typically starting about November, you have vertical curtains of ice, such as this one, that start popping up all over the mountains. And you have ice climbers start to congregate towards the Canadian Rockies with their crampons and ice axes. And I'd always wanted an image that sort of captured the overlap of season. This is at the Cline River Gallery. This is just outside of Banff National Park. And this was taken just before freeze up, but after we had those ice curtains forming. So this was taken with an underwater housing, placing half the lens underwater, half the lens above, and in an effort to try to bring those two worlds together, those two seasons together. And I think we did a job at getting an image that's a good job at getting an image that looks pretty cool that day. So this is the Cline River Gallery, just at on the edge of ice season in the Canadian Rockies. And I got a couple more images for you guys. I hope you've been enjoying so far, and then we'll move on to questions if time allows. So I'll show you another type of ice climbing, and that is glacier ice. Now, glacier ice is very different in texture and feel than waterfall ice. It's not as plasticky. It's more like bulletproof, and it responds to impact very, very differently. So it's more brittle, and it requires a different approach for sure. And I'm showing you this image. This is one of the covers of my books. And this is an image that from a night that I'll never forget. And I love sharing this image because it's a night that I just love to reminisce about. It was so special. This is an image that was essentially, I would argue, almost 2 or 3 years in the making, in the sense that we knew we wanted to capture ice climbing, glacier ice climbing under the aurora. But for that to happen, we live at a latitude where it's not like the northern lights show up every other night. The northern lights remain a fairly rare occurrence here in the Canadian Rockies because we're at the mid latitudes. So we needed the aurora to show up, for one. We needed the skies to remain clear. We needed ice that was climbable, that was stable enough to be climbed. I needed climbers that were very strong. This is not a self-portrait. We needed the road to be open. We actually got denied this opportunity a couple times because the road was closed because of avalanche concerns. So Parks Canada will occasionally close the road to bomb the mountains and make little avalanches come down before big avalanches build up. So they were doing some avalanche control on a couple nights where otherwise all the other factors seemed to align. So we weren't able to get up there. But that night, finally, everything aligned. And I clearly remember just 3 grown men just turning into 5-year-old, like turning into toddlers, giggling for hours because it was just so amazing. The sort of the beauty and immensity of what surrounded us was just so incredible between the aurora and the blueness of the ice that yeah, we turned into little kids for a few hours, got a whole bunch of photos that we really like. And it's the kind of night that whenever I bump into those guys around town or anywhere, we'll go back to talking about that incredible night at the Athabasca Glacier. So this is just on the Banff-Jasper boundary, ice climbing under the aurora at the Athabasca Glacier. Just phenomenal. And I got one last image for you, and I'm finishing with the most recent photograph of the whole exhibit. And this was actually taken on my birthday, on May 10th of this year. Talk about a birthday present, eh? And that was actually also taken on the first night where my oldest daughter accompanied me on the aurora chase. And this is what we got. Absolutely incredible. It was one of the most spectacular aurora displays in decades. It was all over the news. I'm sure a lot of you heard about it. This is actually looking south, which, it's pretty rare at our latitude to see the northern lights in the south. You'd think, especially at the mid latitudes, northern lights 99.9% of the time happen over northern or north looking skylines, not in the south. So this provided me with opportunities to shoot aurora at over a lot of south looking compositions, south looking skylines. And I made a point of hitting 4 or 5 of those locations that kind of look the wrong way for aurora typically, just to make the most of that opportunity. This is Herbert Lake in Banff National Park. And this was, just such an incredible aurora display. The aurora pulsated across the sky, filled the entire sky at times, and the camera revealed a really astonishing array of colors. And a lot of what was special about that night too is a lot of people experienced an aurora sighting for the first time because it reached so far south. Even Missouri had aurora that night, and as a matter of fact, the aurora was reported as far south as Cuba and Hawaii, which may not happen for a long time. And the fact that, the last time that happened, well, the science was so new that we didn't know the aurora was coming. Cameras did not exist. And social media didn't exist. So we weren't able to just spread the word, etc. So all those factors aligned in the way that so many people were able to witness the display. The fact that also this display happened early in the evening when the vast majority of North America was not shrouded in clouds. So there was a lot less cloud cover than usual that night over North America. Everything really aligned. An incredible gift, and I'm just so glad that so many people were able to enjoy it. So this is Herbert Lake, May 10th, 2024. So that's the extent of the images and stories that I wanted to share this evening. I'd love to now open up the floor to questions if anybody has any. But before I hop into questions, I'd love to really thank again the organizers for having me as part of the program this year. Such an honor to represent Canada in this way. Really hope you enjoy the images. I hope they inspire you to get out, maybe invest in your own photography, and maybe take a trip on this side of the border. So thanks so much, everyone, for this opportunity. And I look forward to hopefully hearing some of your questions.
Did you enjoy seeing the Aurora Borealis Northern Lights in Canada?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, I think one of the most amazing things about the aurora is that it's always different, right? It always shows itself in different textures, different colors, in different ways that it moves across the sky. So I've seen the aurora, I don't know, maybe 200 times in my life, and I can tell you, I can guarantee you, every one of those experiences has been wildly different. And so that's what I love about it. And I also love that the science behind the aurora is still in its infancy in a way. And so aurora predictions are really hard to make. And that means that you don't take it for granted. When you go out aurora chasing, you don't win every time. And because you win some, you lose some, when you do see it, it makes it all the more rewarding. It's just fantastic.
How much preparation do you do in order to go to the most remote place in Canada? Like, I noticed some of your photography, it was in like snowy mountains far from anyone. So I was wondering how much work does it take to like prepare for that?
That's a good question. It's I would say some of those more remote environments, there's months of preparation that lead up to those moments for sure. And a lot of it is just doesn't even have to do with the photography. I like to be prepared to just make things as efficient as possible from a photography standpoint, but the vast majority of the time, what's on my mind is just the safety aspect. You know, you look at a place like Nunavut, where a handful of people go into the park every winter, and if you have to be rescued for whatever reason, it's very, very costly and complicated. And it's a place where, yeah, if even a twisted ankle can result in pretty desperate times for sure. So just from simply a safety standpoint, I think it's well worth investing, yeah, putting a lot of work into research, into the proper equipment, proper training for sure. Thankfully, in terms of research, we have so many amazing tools at our disposal now to plan out those trips. You know, trip reports. You can reach out to people who have been. You can look up maps, plan things out. There's lots of amazing online tools. And so, in a way, there's no reason to just be out there unprepared. So, especially if you go to those places where you're at the mercy of Mother Nature, I think everything that you can do in the weeks, months leading up to those, in order to just try to make the experience just safe and enjoyable, then you might as well do for sure. So I put a lot of work into those trips for sure. And thankfully, you know, going with friends, that trip was a trip that I went on with my wife. We sort of shared the load in terms of the logistics. But yeah, I definitely, if you're planning a trip to those more remote environments, I would say reach out to people who've been there, who have firsthand experience, and start really early, so you're not so you're not rushing at the end.
Are there any shots that I mean, I know you mentioned a lot of your shots required some luck, a degree of things kind of falling into place. Were there any almost shots that were memorable to you, like shots that just didn't quite get there, but you were on the edge?
You mean shots that I had in mind and didn't quite materialize, but I got close to getting done?
Yeah, so I'm a photographer as well, and
Yeah.
sometimes I'll come out with a vision and an idea of a shot I want, and I can feel like I'm getting close to it, but sometimes stuff just doesn't quite line up the way you hope or you want it to. Do you have any memories like anything like that?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, thankfully it happens less and less, but I mean, I can't. Oftentimes I've looked at images once I'm home thinking, what was I thinking? Like that would have been a way stronger image had I just fixed this little thing or that little thing in the field for sure. I find that the more you shoot, the more you develop that sort of spirit of self-critique in the field, and you catch yourself in the field correcting those errors while you can still do something about it. But there's images where there's definitely images that nearly materialize that have been in the back of my mind for a long time. I've got this pretty elaborate Google document that's just a bank of ideas. And the vast majority of them will never happen partly because some of them require quite a few factors to align to enable the creation of those images. And I only have a certain amount of my time is limited, so I can't chase every single one of those opportunities. But that bank of images of ideas is always growing, and I find that the more you shoot, the more you set the bar high for yourself, and the more you require just an absurd number of factors to align for a crazy image to come to life. And so it's normal, I think, to fail more often than not. So yeah, a few of the images that you saw tonight were essentially, the third or fourth iteration of the attempts in making those images. And a lot of them have yet to exist, but hopefully I'll be able to transfer them from my brain to the camera, to the memory card in the near future.
Hi, I was wondering if there have been any close calls in terms of safety.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's been some close calls, and especially I think when you venture in mountain environments on a regular basis, sometimes there's also all the close calls that you never notice, right? Sometimes you just get lucky, and you never know sometimes how close you were to disaster. Just nothing happened in the end, and so you feel like you just your decision making was good, but maybe you just got lucky in the end. But there have been close calls that I've been aware of in the field for sure. In the mountains, there's all the objective hazards, rock fall, yeah, avalanches, avalanche zones. Weather can be weather exposure to the cold, to lightning can be an issue. There's all those factors that you try to mitigate when you go out there as best as you can. And I've been very fortunate given how much time I've spent out there for sure. I've never had like a wildlife related close call, honestly. For example, I've had close calls I've had 3 rescues in the mountains that I've been part of, and 3 of them were mountaineering settings. So I've been very, very thankful that the sort of search and rescue service is just so responsive and so top notch at what they do. Eventually, if you get out often enough, the odd mishap will happen for sure. I've had close calls in the sense, yeah, with rockfall for sure. Those hazards are so hard to mitigate. You have to basically avoid that kind of terrain altogether. And sometimes, well, you can't just avoid all risk all the time because life gets pretty boring. There are hazards like, for example, shooting on early season wild ice, on lake ice. That's a lot easier to mitigate, right? Because you can go on the lake. Before you hop on the lake, you can just throw a life jacket on, you can throw a rope on, be on belay, you can be belayed by someone on the shore. You can have we've got those ice picks that we can, if we fall in, we can crawl out and back onto the ice. And we have ice crews where, methodically, that's just for early season ice, where you're not sure about the thickness. You methodically measure, every few feet you place a screw to just see how thick the ice is. So that there are environments, I think, that are a lot easier to mitigate than others. I think sadly, it's just the reality of just outdoor pursuits is eventually, if you spend a lot of time out there because you love it so much, you have to accept the odd mishap will happen. But I like to think that the more you get out, the better you get at decision making and mitigating those types of experiences. But yeah, I've had some, yeah, the odd close call, especially with the quality of the rock. The Canadian Rockies, it's all sedimentary rock. The Canadian Rockies are widely known in the climbing mountaineering world for having some of the worst rock in the world. This place is totally falling apart. And so that's one of my main concerns when I'm out there, being exposed to falling rock. And otherwise, close calls, honestly, I think driving places, I've had more close calls than being out there in the wilderness. This place gets busy in the summer. We get 4 or 5 million visitors a year in Banff National Park, and people are on holiday. There's a bit of distracted driving that happens. So honestly, driving to trailheads and such is maybe as sketchy as just being up there in the vertical world. But thankfully, I've been, I think, pretty fortunate overall.
What's it like taking pictures of like the polar bears and like the grizzly bears? 'Cause I noticed from your photography they like get really like good shots of them, but also know they're kind of like dangerous animals. So like, how was that experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the polar bear shot that I showed you today is taken from a completely safe environment. And all the images that I took when I went up to Manitoba last fall were all taken from what they call the tundra buggy. So it's a little train that travels around the tundra. It's all modular. So you have like the restaurant, like the dining train, the dining cart, the sleeping cart, and then you have the shooting carts basically. And then they break off from the main module during the day and go sort of out in the tundra, see what they can find, and you're way up above the ground and you're never really in super close proximity to a bear. And then at the end of the day, then they just sort of reattach to the main structure. So it's a really, yeah, it's got a nice sort of space station feel. And so those shots were taken from like complete safety. Now, in the Rockies here, there's a fairly large grizzly population, and there's there are there are sort of human wildlife conflicts that happen every year, and almost invariably it's because people make poor decisions and don't give animals the space that they need. But when you're used to living around those animals, I mean, they come in the backyard here, right? So when you're used to living with those animals, you get used to the idea that you're sort of a visitor on their turf, and they have priority, and you give them the space that they need. If you do that, I mean, it's very, very unlikely that you'll ever have an unfortunate encounter. If I'm on foot and I see a bear, getting a photo of it is just not something that crosses my mind, frankly. Usually what you'll try to do is just sort of backtrack and give the bear an exit route, and then that's how the encounter ends. 99% of the time, you have this beautiful sighting in the wild setting, and you make a nice memory and you leave it at that. Occasionally you drive around and you'll see a bear by the road, in which case in certain situations it's you can shoot from the vehicle where you're safe. But I personally wouldn't feel comfortable just being out on foot in close proximity to either grizzlies or polar bears and try to get photos of them. I think the bear always loses in the end anyways. And so I don't think that's a good approach to that type of photography.
I know you're a National Geographic photographer and you travel across the world. What is your favorite place that you've been to, or like your favorite shot that you've taken to your journey?
My favorite place, so I love where I live. So I love to work here in the mountains, but outside of where I live, I would say easily Greenland. Greenland is my favorite place in the world. I've been fortunate to go quite a few times now, and it's not for everyone, but for what I like to do, it's the ultimate playground. It's the ultimate, yeah, it's the ultimate base of operation for landscape photography. There's so much, you have the freedom to just wander still in Greenland. And hopefully it's managed in a way that remains an option. And hopefully people are smart when they visit Greenland, because it's a fragile environment, but it's a place that's got just so much to offer. And for someone who likes to shoot ice and northern lights and vast empty landscapes, it's just as good as it gets. It's massive. I haven't been everywhere. I mean, it's a huge island. I've only seen like 1% of the entire island, but it's a place that I'll never tire to go back to. And I'm heading back with a group exactly a year from now, and I couldn't be more excited. It's truly a place of magic.
Thank you for being a part of the Canon semester at MSSU. We really appreciate having you here. It's a pleasure to meet you.
It was such a pleasure. Thanks so much, everyone.